Sort of 15, 20 minutes later, a plane flew down right above us, so very, very close to our heads, and smashed right into the other tower. It's a massive explosion, people were screaming, a sort of panic. There wasn't even many fire ambulances and things like that on the street.
And discuss education. I do want to thank the folks here at Booker Elementary School for their hospitality.
President Bush is due to make a statement on the plane crash.
2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country. I have spoken to the Vice President, to the Governor of New York, to the Director of the FBI, and have ordered that the full resources of the federal government go to help the victims and their families, and to conduct a full-scale investigation to hunt down and to find those folks who committed this act. Terrorism against our nation will not stand. And now, if you join me in a moment of silence. May God bless the victims, their families, and America. Thank you very much.
That was the US President George Bush talking about an apparent terrorist attack. His comments on 2 planes which appear to have deliberately flown into the side of the World Trade Center in New York. Landmark towers in New York. An apparent terrorist attack, he called it. Stephen Sveach is in Washington. Stephen, it does rather look like a suicide attack, doesn't it?
It does indeed. It does seem hard to think that it's anything other than a suicide attack. Indeed, a double suicide attack by 2 people flying planes. We don't know if anyone else was in them, possibly on their own. And a short but powerful statement there from President Bush, I think quite understandably from his point of view, keeping it very short and succinct, but nonetheless making it very clear he believes this is what he describes as a terrorist attack. He's saying the full resources of the federal government will be brought to bear to hunt down those folks, as he called them, who perpetrated the attack. And he said terrorism in the United States will not stand. So there we are. We have it from the chief executive himself. Not much doubt here from the authorities. This was indeed a deliberate attack.
That this was foul play, in other words.
Absolutely, and I think looking at the evidence, it does seem pretty hard to reach any other conclusion. The idea that you'd have 2 planes coincidentally flying accidentally into the 2 tallest buildings on Manhattan Island in the city of New York, it does seem pretty hard to believe. And therefore, I think all the evidence pointing, as President Bush suggested, towards an attack. And now, of course, people will start to wonder who were the attackers, where did they come from? But very, very early to say at this stage.
Just to remind you, if you've just joined us, we're looking at pictures of the World Trade Center ablaze in New York, the result of 2 planes which flew directly into the Twin Towers, one of the landmarks in New York. It happened at 9 a.m. local time, a very busy time. And this is what one of the eyewitnesses, Jane Beresford, told us.
I was standing down on the Battery Park, a ferry terminal, just waiting to catch a ferry actually across to Ellis Island, and just heard a huge explosion. It's about 8:30 behind me. I thought perhaps a building was being demolished, but in fact, you saw there were just towers of smoke coming out within minutes. And again, we still thought it was just a building demolished. There wasn't any great sort of panic at that time. And then you saw flames raging through the building, and then approximately sort of 15, 20 minutes later, a plane flew down right above us, so very, very close to our heads, and smashed right into the other tower. It's a massive explosion, people were screaming, a sort of panic. There wasn't even many fire ambulances and things like that on the street. It all happened so quickly.
And the emergency services response now?
They are on scene now, but people just seemed to be stunned. There seemed to be nothing happened while this sort of first explosion had happened, and there was sort of this sort of silence and nothing. And then all of a sudden, all the ambulances and fire engines came down onto the streets, and the most shocking thing was this plane just coming, literally right above our heads and just smashed right into the second building. It was like something out of a film. You just couldn't believe what was happening.
You actually saw the plane going into the side of the building?
Smashed into the side of the building. I mean, he thought it was going to swerve to the left or the right to try and avoid it. It was so low, you knew it was on a collision course with the building, but it just seemed to be heading right for it.
Of course, at the moment, it's too early to tell what was behind it, but so far as you could make out, did it look like an accident?
No, it looked like it was. I mean, you just don't get planes. It was quite a large plane. It didn't look. It was low down in the sky in Manhattan. You're not used to seeing planes that low in the sky in Manhattan, and it just was heading straight for the tower.
Jane Beresford, an eyewitness to the attack on the World Trade Center in New York. President Bush said that it was an apparent terrorist attack, and the FBI has called it foul play. Stephen Speech joins us from Washington. Stephen, what's the latest information you have?
Well, one of the latest information pieces of information that we have is that the FBI are investigating reports that two planes belonging to United Airlines were hijacked before the incident, before the attack, and therefore that will of course be one line of inquiry in this investigation. Where were the planes hijacked? Who were the hijackers? And that may, of course, provide some sort of evidence as to what brought this about. And I think inevitably people are going to start talking about the Middle East, about possible motives for this attack. But very early to say.
There doesn't appear to have been any sort of warning, does there?
No, I mean, I'm sure the authorities here receive warnings about threats to U.S. interests all over the world all the time, in a sense. I mean, we've had attacks on U.S. targets in Yemen. We had those attacks on the embassies in Tanzania and Kenya back in 1998. But incidents of this kind on U.S. soil, extremely rare. And we have to go back to the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center, the same building, the 1995 Oklahoma bombing by Timothy McVeigh, and then the attack at the Atlanta Olympics in 1996, although it's still not entirely clear what brought that about. But incidents of this kind, very, very rare indeed here, and therefore I think that really adds to the sense of shock. And I think just to see the two towers, the tallest buildings in New York, symbols of American power and American capitalism, if you like, to see those two towers on fire, I think that is a pretty chilling sight for people around the country.
Stephen Siege, thank you for that. Those two towers on fire down in New York, the World Trade Center, the result of an apparent terrorist attack. That's what the US president said. Two planes crashed into the Twin Towers as a result of what appears to be a deliberate suicide mission. Joining us now from Washington is Neil Livingston, a terrorism expert. Does this look like an apparent terrorist attack to you?
Well, I think it does. You have to remember that some years ago we had a plane crash at the Empire State Building in the fog, and that was clearly an accident. This is a clear day. The towers are clearly visible. We have two crashes 19 minutes apart, and now we have unconfirmed rumors that unconfirmed reports that one of the planes may have been hijacked. So everything points to a terrorist attack right now.
The reports you're getting are that a plane might have been hijacked and then diverted onto this.
We have unconfirmed reports at this moment.
Why is the World Trade Center being targeted in this way, do you think?
Well, it's a symbol of American strength and the American capitalism. It's just been announced that the stock market has suspended trading. And as a consequence, it's one of those targets that is at the very heart of how our system works. And if you can shut down the stock market in addition to creating a high loss of life, then you can bring extraordinary publicity to whatever your cause is.
The security around the World Trade Center must be very high, I suppose, as a result of the bombing back in 1993.
Well, it's not as high as you might think. I've been there many times, and obviously there are so many thousands of people, some say 70 to 100,000 people a day visit some part of the World Trade Center, work there, and as a consequence, this is one of those places that you have to have free egress and access to the building. So there are trade-offs with security, and certainly the airspace around it. It's very easy to divert out of the flight pattern going into LaGuardia or one of the surrounding airports and veer off and go toward the World Trade Center.
We've got reports coming in on the Reuters news agency that a Palestinian group has claimed responsibility for the New York World Trade Center attacks. Those are unconfirmed, I must stress. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I suspect that we may see this as Islamicist terrorism. And, of course, if that's the case, I think that there's going to be hell to pay in the weeks and months ahead. I don't think that this is the kind of terrorist attack that the United States will take quietly. I think it's basically amounts to a declaration of war, and I think it will be seen that way by the Bush administration.
Well, President Bush, speaking just a short while ago, said that the U.S. would hunt down those who committed the attack on the World Trade Center. But it's not going to be easy.
Well, it won't be easy, but I suspect that we may be able to hunt them down. We've been able to do that in other recent terrorist cases. And if we find the governments have harbored or supported the terrorists in any way, I think those governments become extremely vulnerable at that point.
For viewers who've just joined us, we're going to show you pictures of the second plane as it flew in and appears deliberately to have gone straight into the side of one of the towers. Earlier, another plane had targeted the other tower. You can see an enormous explosion as a direct consequence of that hit. An eyewitness told us it did not look like an accident to her. Still on the line with us is terrorism expert Neil Livingston. The second such attack against the World Trade Center, it must be really quite horrific for the people there at the moment.
Well, we can only imagine what it's like. We have some early reports of absolute pandemonium, absolute chaos, injured people, smoke filling the buildings. Both towers, as you know, are on fire. I think that the loss of life is going to be horrific, and we can only speculate right now on the casualties, and they have our prayers, of course.
Neil Livingston, thank you for joining us. And Ash Raven, who was an eyewitness to the earlier explosion, joined us, and this is what he told us.
Well, I just got off the train right in the belly at the World Trade Center, the train that was getting me in from home this morning. And first, there was just a tremendous smell of gasoline and petroleum. But we just figured that was sort of a train situation. So we were making ourselves up rather calmly on those large escalators. And suddenly there was a sort of a panic run by the rest of the commuters. And then there was a huge explosion. And as we sort of rushed out of the building, we saw what looked like a ticker tape parade. Papers and streamers flowing everywhere. It just looked so surreal. But then the sheer fear and, I guess, the panic of the situation, most of us just ran to side corridors and stuff like that outside on the street. And then moments later, there was another explosion. So all we could see was a tremendous pall of smoke and certainly fire under that smoke in one of the towers of the building. But I got the impression that as I kept running towards my office, more and more people were saying that the second tower had caught on fire as well. I had no idea as to the planes and so on and so forth. I just thought it was some sort of an explosion or a regular fire. But then again, all of downtown looks like a whole mass of people on the street. Trucks, cars, all just strewn around, a pall of black smoke that looks like a tornado climbing over the rest of Wall Street. I could actually now see from my window. I'm now in my office, a little away from the World Trade Center, about a block away. And I could see through my window, and I could see just humanity right downstairs, just strewn with people, cars and trucks and so on and so forth, lots of confusion. And I guess I still don't know what is going on there.
It's a very, very busy time of morning, of course, isn't it, Ash?
You couldn't have picked, a busier time this morning. So that is really unfortunate. I just hope and I pray for those people in those 2 or 3 floors, or perhaps even more floors, that were affected the World Trade Center. This is such a stark coincidence for me, because I was there when the explosion went off in the World Trade Center many, many years ago, and I had to walk down 63 floors from the 63rd floor of World Trade Center number 2 with the rest of my colleagues, and that was then. And today, I happen to be in the same building. How could that possibly be? The same building, right at the belly of the building, getting off the train.
How many floors appear to be affected?
Just from a sort of a quick visual glance at the building, when I was outside the building, it looked more like 6 or 7 with a real heavy fire and a thick black ball of smoke. But apparently now, I've been hearing just from people on the street. I'm not sure how credible those observations are, that it's clearly more floors and certainly another building as well, another tower, the second tower.
Eyewitness Ash Raven. Now we're going to cross to Washington. There are pictures there of a hotel behind the Pentagon. There are reports of a terrorist attack on the Pentagon as well. There certainly has been an explosion. You can see thick smoke coming out from behind the Pentagon. It's been evacuated, and there are reports coming through that the White House too has been evacuated. This just a short while after 2 planes attacked the World Trade Center in New York. President Bush said earlier that they were apparent terrorist attacks. It now looks as if the focus of these attacks, if that's what they are, has switched to Washington, to the nerve center of the American government, to the Pentagon, the defense headquarters, and possibly to the White House itself. Joining us now is aviation expert Robert Houston. Robert, what can you tell us about the World Trade Center attacks?
The World Trade Center attack seems to be an astonishingly well-planned, a daring and appalling act. Some of the descriptions that I've heard describe the aircraft involved as small passenger aircraft, but it's far more serious than that. The second aircraft that hit the towers, which there is film of, which some of your viewers may have seen, that is a Boeing 737. It is not a small aircraft. It's a 100-seat airliner, and obviously a very calculated multiple hijacking plan with a suicide attack at the end of it has been put into place by whoever is behind this.
Robert Houston, can you stay with us? We're going to cross to Washington now, where we're getting reports of attacks, possible attacks on the Pentagon. We're joined now by the BBC's John Lyne. John, what can you tell us?
Okay, I'm at Washington National Airport, which is less than a mile from the Pentagon building, which is the headquarters, of course, of the U.S. Defense Department. There's a huge pall of smoke coming from that direction, and people at this airport are saying that a Boeing 757 jetliner has crashed into the Pentagon. Now, I cannot confirm that. Certainly something very bad has happened there. There's a horrible smell here. There's a huge pall of smoke, and there's obviously been some awful thing happened there, but I can't precisely confirm because I cannot see the Pentagon building directly in my line of sight. But certainly from that area, there is a massive pile of smoke. They've shut down this airport. I was just trying to get a plane to New York. They've shut down this airport immediately. There are no plane movements, and they're evacuating the area. It looks as if something very nasty has happened here today indeed.
John, thank you for that. We're looking at pictures from Washington, from just behind the Pentagon, the defense headquarters in the United States. John Lyne is at Washington Airport. John, the defense headquarters would be an extraordinary target. We've lost John Lyne. With me in the studio, though, is the BBC's Jim Fish. Jim, a series of coordinated attacks.
It looks very much like it, yes. An extraordinary amount of, as the defence expert was saying, the aviation expert just then, an extraordinary amount of coordination required to hijack, if that's the case, not 1 but 3 aircraft and crash them into such high-profile targets within minutes or within the space of an hour of each other. One thing, of course, people will now be looking at the perpetrators, the possible perpetrators of these attacks, and they do bear the same hallmark of the twin attacks, if you recall, back in 1998 on the 2 U.S. embassies in East Africa, in Nairobi, Kenya, and in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, which took place within minutes of each other, but several hundred miles apart. They also caused large numbers of casualties. They were blamed by the American authorities on Middle East terrorists, possibly on Osama bin Laden, the Saudi dissident now thought to be in Afghanistan. If these attacks are also to be put down to the same organization, I'm sure that American officials will be looking very carefully at that possibility, the possibility that Osama bin Laden may have been involved in this. But of course, at the moment, it's far too early to tell.
At the moment, we're looking at pictures of the World Trade Center in New York, which is ablaze as a result of being attacked by two planes, one a 737, which may have been hijacked before it was flown straight into the World Trade Center, but also in Washington, at the heart of U.S. government. There are reports that another plane, a 757, may have flown directly into the heart of the U.S. defense establishment, into the Pentagon. Those are unconfirmed reports, though we have seen pictures of smoke billowing out from the Pentagon. We've got reports that Washington is being evacuated, the very heart of Washington, the U.S. Capitol, including the White House. Earlier, the U.S. President George Bush said he thought they were apparent terrorist attacks and that whoever was responsible would be hunted down. The BBC's Orla Guerin joins us. Orla, what can you tell us?
Well, what we've had here locally is a claim of responsibility. The initial report came from the Reuters news agency. It was quoting Abu Dhabi television and saying that they had received a call from the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, claiming that it was responsible for the plane crashes into both of the trade towers. Now, since then, we've managed to check with local spokesmen for that organisation, for the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, and two local spokesmen here in the West Bank and Ramallah have denied that. So already there is doubt being cast on this claim, and I think it has to be treated with a great deal of caution at this stage.
We're looking at pictures at the moment. Two enormous fires. The one on the left is in New York, the World Trade Center, which was attacked by two planes around about 9 o'clock this morning. The one on the right, the Pentagon, the U.S. Defense Headquarters. Some reports say that a plane was flown straight into the Pentagon. That is as yet unconfirmed. Palestinian organization, the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, has apparently claimed responsibility. Orla Guerin joins us now. Orla, what can you tell us about the DFLP?
Well, I think, first of all, we should say that that claim does have to be treated with caution because local spokesmen for that organisation here in the West Bank and Ramallah are denying that they had any involvement. It would be unusual if this organisation was involved. It's quite a small splinter faction of the Palestinian Liberation Organisation. It's believed to be now about the third largest group. It hasn't been involved in airline hijackings in the past, even back in the 1970s, when Palestinian terror groups were carrying out attacks of that kind and were involved in hijackings. It wasn't this faction, it was another one. So I do think we have to be cautious. But the initial claim was reported by the Reuters news agency. They were quoting Abu Dhabi television and saying that they had received a call from the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine. And in that call, they apparently did claim responsibility for both of those aircrafts crashing into the World Trade Towers.
OK, Orla, thank you for that. We're looking at pictures of two enormous fires, one in New York at the World Trade Center, the other at the Pentagon. They both appear to be the result of deliberate plane crashes, suicide missions. Joining us from Washington is the BBC's Stephen Speech. Stephen, what can you tell us about this situation at the Pentagon?
Well, it seems that a third aircraft is involved. These are the reports we're getting, that a third aircraft has crashed, and it's possible that it actually did crash into the Pentagon or somewhere near the Pentagon. So really quite extraordinary. Not only has this attack, as I think we can call it, been carried out in New York, the World Trade Center, the symbol of American financial, economic power, but also at the Pentagon, the heart of the U.S. military complex. Quite extraordinary, and I think pretty shocking for most people here.
And what time does this attack at the Pentagon appear to have taken place at, Stephen?
Well, it seems to have been shortly after the attacks on the World Trade Center. Now, it's possible that it didn't happen that long afterwards, that we've only just found out about it. But I think, yes, I mean, you know, we're talking about within an hour of the attack on the World Trade Center. So clearly highly coordinated, very well planned by some very, very determined people.
The word we get is that the Washington capital is being evacuated.
Well, certainly I think government buildings will be evacuated. I think if I was sitting in a US government building here just down the road at the State Department or the Treasury, I think I'd be pretty nervous just seeing all these places, as it were, going up in smoke one after the other. I think you've got to think, well, what's coming next? And I think clearly a sensible move and inevitable move to evacuate these buildings and just increases the sense of vulnerability that people working for the US government have, and also the sense that there are people out there who just, don't like what they're doing for whatever reason and are going to try and hit them.
Was there any sense of preparedness in Washington for anything like this in the last few days?
No, I don't think so. I mean, yeah, it's possible that the authorities here knew something was coming. But one thinks if they had any idea that anything on this scale was going to happen, they might have actually asked people not to turn up for work, or have taken the precaution of evacuating these buildings earlier on. So I don't think among people here there was any sense of that. I mean, it was curious. Just the other day, I was walking through Washington, and it did strike me that there are so many prominent people, prominent buildings here. In a sense, this is the heart of power, the heart of the world's only superpower, and a very, very tempting target for people who want to get at the United States. And it does call into question, is it possible to provide absolute security? President Bush wants to provide a missile defense shield for the United States to protect against intercontinental ballistic missiles. Some people think that's possible, others think it isn't. And yet we have here a few planes hijacked in the United States and flying low, avoiding detection by radar, and carrying out these attacks. So it's a pretty sobering day for Americans.
What's the latest information we have, Stephen, on those planes? You said that they'd been hijacked. Do we know that for certain?
This information is still coming in. I mean, we've had some pretty credible reports, and it's certainly being investigated by the FBI, that the planes were hijacked. I think a couple of them from United Airlines. But we still need to get absolute confirmation of that. And now, of course, we know that all the planes, it seems, planes right around the States are being grounded. So the authorities clearly taking this very seriously, as you would expect them to.
Stephen Sveach, thank you for that. We're just going to take another look at the pictures of the second plane as it flew into the side of the World Trade Center in New York shortly after an earlier plane had attacked the other Trade Center building. Right down in downtown Manhattan, you can see an enormous explosion there. It appears to have been a coordinated attack because in Washington, the Pentagon has also suffered an attack, or buildings close to the Pentagon appear to have been attacked, also by planes, large planes, possibly as large as a 757. This appears to be a terrorist attack. A Palestinian organization, the DFLP, was said to have been responsible, but a senior official for that organization has denied responsibility. So at the present, we do not know who was responsible for these attacks in the United States, at the World Trade Center in New York and at the Pentagon in Washington. Washington has been evacuated. The heart of Washington, government offices are being evacuated. You can see at the moment pictures from around the Pentagon, rescue workers trying to put out the blaze. We saw an ambulance go by a few minutes ago. Stephen Sveach is in Washington. Stephen, what's the latest information we have?
Well, the latest information is that government buildings around the city, around Washington, D.C., have been evacuated. There is a fire going on at or around the Pentagon. It appears that a third plane crashed into or very nearby the Pentagon, in addition to the two planes that crashed into the World Trade Center. No reports of casualties here in Washington, but I think many casualties, certainly perhaps 5 more dead in the World Trade Center and many, many injured.
Joining us now is Greg Barrow in New York. Greg, what's the latest information from the World Trade Center?
Well, the latest we have is that the whole area has been sealed off. The police and security personnel are down there trying to clear members of the public away. This was a very, very busy time of the morning in New York, just as everybody was going into their offices, so it couldn't really have come at a worse time. And I think that the search is already beginning for those who may be to blame for this incident that has really, truly shocked people, not just here in in New York, but also around the country.
Any word on fatalities? It was a very, very busy time.
Well, it was a busy time. We won't know for some time yet just how many people were killed or injured. Now, if there were large numbers of people on the planes that crashed into the building, then clearly that is going to